Good evening. Welcome to Let's Talk Maywood. I am Dr. Reggie Ratliff, your host for this podcast. I am flying solo tonight as Terry will be working in the background, making sure everything runs smoothly. And before we introduce our guests, I would like to just point out a couple accomplishments in the community, particularly in Proviso Township in my hometown of Maywood. First, congratulations to Maywood Village Trustee Miguel Jones, who partnered with Broadview Mayor Katrina Thompson, and they put together a Tour de Proviso. No, it's not Tour de France in Proviso, it's Tour de Proviso, just like it sounds. They put together an event, and it started this bike ride started in Riverside, thanks also to the contribution of Mayor Joseph Ballerine. They had 450 participants that rode through Brookfield Zoo and other areas. So congratulations for an excellent turnout, Mayor Thompson and Trustee Jones. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to those who are responsible, the board, and those who work with the board on bringing home the IB program to Proviso East and Proviso West. My understanding is they are a full IB. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the IB program, this is an International Baccalaureate program, which is a very seasoned program. It is obviously global. That's why I call it international. But it has a lot of benefits that leads to scholarships. And depending on your performance on the IB exam, you will receive advanced college credits. That means that for a school such as UCLA, Rutgers University, St. John's University, the University, Mississippi State University, these schools and universities will accept IB credit, full diploma program, and you could graduate from college one semester or a year early. Now, somebody such as myself who works in the IB program, there are many benefits to the IB program in addition to graduating with advanced college credits. It looks good on your portfolio. It shows that you can handle the full IB program and the demands at the SL and HL level. SL is standard learning, HL is higher learning. And so when you talk about these disciplines, whether it is business management, which is what I had, along with, say, history or psychology or sciences, these are all disciplines that are necessary in getting advanced in your career anywhere in the world, especially those who accept the IB program. The IB program, in my opinion, is the most elite program, most prepared program in terms of preparing our high school juniors and seniors for higher academia than any other program out there. Why? Again, because it's a global program. So congratulations to Proviso East and Proviso West being full IB programs. Also, one other announcement I'd like to make before I introduce my guests. Please tune in every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time for our Masters in Financial Investment class. This is a class that's co-facilitated by yours truly and Terrence Hollingsworth, who also is also an expert investment advisor. We have fruitful discussions about the stock market. When is a good time to buy? We have a next discussion about, when is a good time to sell stock, looking at your portfolio, diversifying your portfolio. You don't have to be a seasoned investor. You don't have to be a seasoned day trader to be part of this. You can be someone that's interested or a new person who's just getting involved with the stock market. But our people needs to become very involved, become more engaged in the stock market. We hear all about real estate and insurance, but the stock market is where you're going to make money at a faster pace than any other type of investment vehicle. It is the stock market. So during this inflationary period that we're experiencing right now is the time to start investing. So if you have questions, please join us. If you're interested, contact me at sratliff68@yahoo.com. Let me know your interest in the class. And in turn, I will send you a Zoom link to access the class, and we will have that hour discussion. Again, this is free of charge, and you're receiving free information from us. And we're legit. We are certified. We are seasoned, and we know what we're talking about. So join us for that time. And so now at this time, I would like to go ahead and introduce the guest of the hour. His name is Mr. Robert Cox. Mr. Cox, also known as Bob, graduated from Proviso East High School in 1972. He has participated in the private sector as a business owner and in management for over 3 decades. Bob was CEO at the age of 24 of a family bakery business operating between 1979 and 1989. Bob remained in the bakery industry for an additional 10 years before exiting as a recognized Chicagoan artisan cake decorator, completing over 5,000 wedding cakes. Bob has also become interested in neighborhood and historic preservation issues at an early age. He volunteered in Forest Park Main Street Redevelopment Association, part of National Main Street Program. Bob is self-taught in historic preservation and an active community historian. Throughout the years, Bob has continued serving as a volunteer in many local neighborhood organizations, including the local Historical Society as a board member and president, SEED, and as Cook County Commissioner Boykin's Educational Task Force co-chair. Bob also served as a District 209 school board member in 2007. He received his bachelor's degree in urban planning and public affairs from UIC's CUPPA program in 2010. So for those of you out there who are striving to return to school after missing some time, there's a saying, it doesn't matter when you finish as long as you finish. And at UIC, Bob studied under Dr. Dick Simpson and minored in political science. Over the years, Bob wrote the occasional editorial on neighborhood development and public educational issues. He authored 2 regular columns for the Forest Park Post, and he is the writer of a book called Curious Proviso, which is his first book. We will talk about that on this podcast. And so without further ado, I'd like to have and invite Mr. Robert Bob Cox onto the podcast. Good evening, Bob. How are you?
Dr. Ratliff, very good. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great opportunity, and I appreciate that.
Pleasure to have you, and thank you for taking time from your schedule to join me on this evening. I want to get started this evening, Bob, if you don't mind, talking about your experiences growing up in Forest Park before you journeyed to Proviso East High School. How was that growing up during your time in Forest Park?
Well, I think it's a typical late 50s, early 60s experience, being born in 1954. Forest Park was basically a blue-collar neighborhood, predominantly white neighborhood. We had always been in Proviso's feeder school districts and managed to send, in 1968, about 280 students from Forest Park to Proviso East. There was also 2 parochial schools, St. Bernie's and St. John's, that fed into that. If you take a look at today, last year, that number has gone to 75. So there's some type of pattern there, and we can discuss later how that happened. But it was interesting. So growing up, we were going to Proviso. Everyone we knew, friends, our cohort, stayed together and went to Proviso, and it was an interesting experience. I can talk to our freshman year if you have a specific question, if you like.
Let's roll into that. You're a freshman at Proviso East High School, 1968. A very critical year, so to speak. Okay. Sure. A lot going on. We're going to unpack that right now. What was that experience starting?
Okay. So right before we had into Proviso in the fall, in the summer or in the spring, we had assassinations of Robert Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King. We had the Olympics, Tommie Smith, Black Power. We had the summer Democratic Convention, heads cracking and stuff. This was all precursing that we were going to high school. And for Forest Park kids, this probably was the first time they'd probably seen anybody who wasn't necessarily white. Not that that scared us. Proviso had a reputation of being a tough school, but our grade school and our school system in Forest Park prepared us. We were given really good instruction on math and science because they said that's what you have to do to get through, Proviso. So we were upping the game, although that we weren't necessarily thinking it was going to be an easy take or it was going to be something that was, I guess, culturally acceptable. We were going to have to be a little more open-minded. So we hit the road running pretty well until we got to a point where there were some difficulties. I call them more the West Side Story of Melrose Park Italian thugs versus Maywood thugs. In a fight, 200 kids got suspended. There was a weapons list, and it was basically because there was a homecoming scenario where no black candidate had ever been offered that position, and it was almost a mathematically impossible thing to achieve. So it was a fight. It was the only fight that I saw in that manner. Once it happened, and there were some other disruptions in '67. I looked at my transcripts coming back And I missed one day that semester. So it wasn't even like I was missing for a fight. We went back to school the next day and tried to figure out what was going on. But it was really interesting. Here it is, the first week or two of school, and all
Yeah.
of a sudden you have that type of difficulty. So
Your first 14 years of your life leading up to Proviso Week. So 13 years, because you started at the age of 13
yeah,
in Proviso
yeah,
Week, correct?
yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So, from your time of birth from 1954 all the way to your entrance at Proviso Week in 1968, I mean, there was a lot going on. You had Brown versus Board of Education taking place. You had the Vietnam War taking place. You had the Civil Rights Act 64 going on. You had the Voting Rights Act of 1965 going on. In addition to, you mentioned Dr. King assassination, Robert Kennedy assassination. You mentioned Tommy Smith and John Carlos. Those were two of the medalists in the 1968 Olympiad when they put up the fist. They got them kicked off the U.S. Olympic team. I mean, list goes on and on. In addition to student protests. So there was a lot going on during your time. It really transformed America, especially with regards to race relations, right?
Sure, I would think so. In fact, one big thing that we don't even think about too much, we had Chicago riots, and basically as far west as Austin, Austin neighborhood, all of a sudden Detroit, all the cities, LA, there was just it was remarkable. So one interesting point on historical things that I see is the Warren, not the Warren report, the Carter report discusses in detail how these things happen, and I really enjoy the fact that no one paid attention to it, on the fact that they have some valuable insights that we can still learn from today.
A lot of what happened during that time you can still apply to today. I mean, race relations is still a problem. We'll talk about your book in just a moment, but when you think about how 68, and they said it ended on a positive note with Apollo 8 that orbited the moon. I don't know if that overshadowed that DNC, the Democratic National Convention in 1968, when there also were the race riots happening then under, Mayor Daley, Richard Daley, a lot going on back then. But, when you see what was taking place as a student at Proviso West, we omitted to mention, and you mentioned this in your book, how Proviso West started to break ground in 1958.
That's right. Right.
And at that time, it was an Italian neighborhood.
No, actually, it wasn't. Kids who lived in Westchester and the western suburbs were all going to East. East had about 4,000 population, so it was quite larger. And it was only called Proviso High School up until the time West was made. That's where people like Ray Nitschke went to. That's where places like Eugene Cernan went to. Proviso East came after that point. But primarily, every 50 years, Proviso decides to make a campus, and they drop one. But that campus, if you look at, I haven't found anything contrary to this, that it was made probably to service white students as they figured the deterioration of the age of the building or demographics or the economics even of Maywood. American Can Company moving out. There was a signal. You got that iconic picture of state troopers or showing students in. And I looked at that picture a million times before I realized there's no black people in that. So who were they protecting people from? Were they protecting people not getting into school or people from getting out of the school? So that started it. That was a turning point. That was probably the biggest one-day event that changed the trajectory of what Proviso High School went through.
Absolutely.
But I have to also say that 69 was the other spring of 69. We won the state basketball championship.
Yes.
So completely changed wherever. We were on an arc that just said, hey, we never had any issues after that. We were very happy.
I wanted to ask you about that. When led by Ari Carswell, Jimmy Papa Brewer, the captain of that 69 team,
Sure.
Did that bring the school together and the community together after winning that state championship?
I think it absolutely did. We knew they had a couple of years before they had some really strong teams. And we have to look at that particular year and the number of championships. That was an integrated team, white guys and black guys. The 74 championship was an integrated team, white guys and black guys. And then a couple other championships after were all black squads. Milliken, who was the coach at the time, it became my principal when we graduated 72, states, and I put it in my book, that our goal is to become the best integrated high school in the country. And I think that scared the heck out of everybody because there was nothing, we don't even have words like diversity or such. And if we would have matched that, at least kept it as a integrated high school, which means that you're going to have a lot of different groups, no one, talking over you, no one dominating. We'd be in a much better situation. But it turned out that we just reversed the order. We just became segregated. And that's where proviso went to, accommodation school. Good enough for them, but not good enough for us.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot that was happening during that time with even Melrose Park, which was that was Italian neighborhood back then.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. But again, to go, I remember Principal Milliken because I'm class of '86, and he was a really humble guy, even in spite of his successes and things like that. He was easy to talk to, and he was a big figure at Proviso East, but just humble man, and very easy to talk to.
Yeah, people get the wrong impression, like all of a sudden people are fighting each other at Proviso. It never was the case. I mean, I had a couple situations where I got beat up, one time by a group of black guys and one guy by a white guy. He almost killed me. It's just, I had beat me up on my forehead or something. I was a little kid. But the thing is, we got along. And I think that, and after seeing the all-class picnic this last summer, I tell you if you it or not, man, everybody's proud of going to Proviso in their own way. I had guys come up and say, "Hey, you guys are 72. We were born in that year." And I told them candidly, says, "Well, it's what do you think we did after we graduated?" So the point is that they're proud, and that was a great unifying event. And I think that's one thing that the community did need. There was naysayers about that. They think they didn't pull that off, and there'd be danger and stuff. But it was a very nice.
It's a phenomenal
next year.
Yep. Yeah, it's phenomenal. I mean, from the class of 1951 all the way to the class of 2022. That was just a phenomenal time in Proviso history. I mean,
and there's still guys in the class 69 basketball championship to come to those things, so it's great to see them. They get honored once in a while. It's just wonderful. Brings back a lot of memories.
I want to piggyback really quick. When I was a student at Proviso East, I had to be a freshman, and I remember I was in the cafeteria and I lost some money. It was $5, and I thought someone stole it. So I went to the main office. And I was complaining, crying. I was like, somebody stole my money. Somebody stole my $5. Who took my money? And Mr. Milliken, I remember, he came to me. He said, Reggie, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to go ahead and make up that $5 for you. And it's going to come out of our budget, but I'm going to reward you because you said someone took your money, and I'm going to go ahead with that. And to me, it was just a principle of the matter because I could have been just anybody just made up something, but I guess he saw in my heart that I really was missing that money, and that was my lunch money. That was my lunch money for the week. So, that's what I remember most about Mr. Miller.
He cared about the students and all the students, and I don't think the color issue was one that he indicated that he would approve of either way. He talked to his basketball players. He was all treated fairly, and even if they got yelled at, they were treated fairly. One story that goes there, if you know the history about the managers for the basketball team. The managers get to be managers from a basketball team because often they're just students that have a hard time. They're either in trouble or going to be suspended. So he makes them an offer. Either you be a manager on the team, get your stuff together, and or you're going to have to go somewhere else. You can't stay here. So he changed a lot of people's lives. That's a positive way. So,
yeah, that speaks highly of Mr. Milliken. I want to talk a little bit about the book, Curious Proviso. I want to know, first of all, how did you come up with the title of that book? Where did the title come from?
Well, the actual title comes from a travel book that I read called Curious Scotland. And the premise is that there's many things you don't know about something that's supposedly familiar. And it was a great theme because there's thousands of Proviso stories that people have no idea about, famous alums, whatever. So it was a good title. The part of it, and this is the extended part of it that I wrote with the intentions of getting a little deeper, is its observation of an American urban high school. What happened in Proviso happened all over in urban high schools. Yeah. We could have been a model at some point, turning point. We ended up kind of like showing what was happening everywhere. And if we could learn by our mistakes, my premise was, or make it aware, then I think we could do better for the 21st century. And so that's really why I did it. My hope, my challenge is that someone's going to write a better book. Someone's going to write a more, especially if it's a student, there's going to maybe be a alumni of a PMSA that'll come out with something that's talked about. So it is a unspoken or a taboo to talk about Proviso East in the Proviso, what I call a confederation of Proviso communities, because they're not united about Proviso High School at all. In fact, my only push against politics, and I talk about it in the book, is that you won't find a an elected official saying, send your kids to Proviso East. We have full support. You just won't
Yeah.
find it. And that's part of the social capital that's missing now that maybe they had back in the 60s, or at least until the schools had changed. So,
well, in your book, you talked about your upbringing. You talked about attending Proviso and your background growing up in Forest Park. You also mentioned somebody that's near and dear to many of our hearts, Dr. Cynthia Broughton, and how she was instrumental in, your friendship and just making it through Proviso, if you will, as a white student. Talk about that relationship with Cynthia Broughton, Dr. Cynthia.
well, I had the opportunity to interact with Cynthia on a couple occasions. Our 40th reunion, we were co-chairs. And this last time she chaired this, and I imagine played hooky most of the time, but she put up with me. Cynthia was one of the cool kids. I was just really a geek, in high school. But the point being is that she was the first African American teacher at Proviso West. She also was a superintendent at District 89. I didn't even know this when I was a board member for whatever reason. And her story is in the book, and the book is important, and it talks about the racial concerns of how she probably would have been our class's homecoming queen or prom queen, and what unfortunately what the administration tried to do and did do is they just scrapped it. They said we're not going to have any, and it just made no sense to me at all not to try and get students to work these things out for themselves rather than sell it that we can't. It's a problem. We have to put it under wraps. Even the Provi was doing things where they didn't want to send pictures of biracial relationships or to students. So it was a hard time there. Her story is very interesting. And I think anybody wants to, I always pitch it for every February for Black History Month. You want to find out what it was like being in high school in 1968 and you're a woman? She's got a great story.
Yeah, so. Very good. And I know her maiden name is Richardson, Cynthia Richardson. And so she did well. She was actually my typing teacher at Proviso East.
Oh, yeah.
She was like typing 105 words a minute. She just like, go. I'm like, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to type. And I thank God for her because it helped me through my career. She was a very instrumental woman in many of our lives as young people.
Yeah, you also had goals and we moved forward on it. That was the thing, where nobody slacked. You couldn't slack at Proviso East at the time we went there.
Well, those, many of our teachers cared, okay, regardless of race, because I can talk about my white wrestling coach, Bill Cartwright, Glenn Lidd, Ben Cuss, then Dr. Charles Flowers, who's African American and Proviso East graduate himself, Dr. Charles Flowers. I mean, they cared about us. And like you mentioned, Coach Milliken would yell at someone, but he didn't do it as a punitive way. He did it to coach us up. And the teachers, they would get on a case to teach us up. So when you had the Dr. Richardson and others that went through the system when I was going to Proviso East and you at Proviso East, we knew that they cared about us, regardless of what was going on outside those walls in the community. We knew that they had our back.
Yeah, it was a safe place. I mean, it's probably safer than being on the street for sure. But I think that was the overall perception. And it's all about perceptions when you talk about Proviso. If people are fearful, their perception of Proviso is a bad place or unsafe place, they stay away from it. And that's and when the media, not your social media, but when the print media would write the failing system at Proviso or the failing schools at Proviso, I would come to those editors and tell them, hey, listen, that affects the students adversely. Don't write that stuff. You can write about problems or an observation, good, but don't make it where they're automatically damaged goods. And that's where the baked-in effect of racism played a big part in.
It permeates and it festers, and then it becomes a belief system. And that's unfortunate because Proviso East and Proviso West, just Proviso East because it's so old, over a century old, is a historic, successful institution. Regardless of its challenges of recent years, the good years have far exceeded the years that's experiencing right now. So that means if it once was doing well, even during your time of the 60s and my time during the 80s, we can get back to that spot where it could be productive again. You agree?
Sure. I do agree. I was early impressed by taking a stand that I didn't want to make, and this is kind of cliche these days, make Proviso great again. First of all, it's a 20th century model, and it's packaged in white education. 21st century model, they've already made the path. And if you look at the conditions of the school now physically and the programs that they have now, it's a completely different school. It's not just school that your grandmother or father went to. So the problem is that people don't trust the system enough, or don't trust administrators, don't trust boards of education members. And that's problematic because of the fact you can't get consensus, you can't get continuity from everybody. Everybody's on either side. Where in that case, my only focus, and major focus, is how can we make this classroom experience better for all the proviso students? And I pitch that all the time, and sometimes just get a blank stare from the powers that be. So.
Yeah. Well, in your book, you mentioned, and it's heartbreaking to see this, but in your book on page 6, you said a USA Today news article in the 2000 named Maywood Melrose Park School District 89, which is an elementary school district in Maywood and Melrose Park, that school district as the most segregated school district in America. And all of the thousands of school districts in the United States of America, Maywood Melrose Park was whatever written as the most segregated. That I don't know about that.
Well, this was a deal. I was doing some research at UIC for some completely different project, and I had to go through newspapers. They were doing that microfilm at the time. It wasn't, and I remembered it, and I think it was Christian Science Monitor that published it. I think there's some validity because Maywood does have a history of segregation. Park districts were different. There was a white and a black one. If you go back to Provise, I actually found a picture or indication that there was a minstrel show in 1939 and 1940 done by Proviso students. There's always been the whole idea of integration, as we talk with Principal Milliken stating, is that you have to be integrated, which means you have people together. It isn't separating separate but equal, which failed terribly. And that's kind of what happened. All of a sudden, we had mixed classes. My lab partner was a young black girl, and one of our reunions came up. She says, "Bob, you were my lab partner. You got me through chemistry. I became a pharmacist." That's the kind of interaction you want to have. I wasn't a brilliant kid, but the point was we wanted to study. We liked our teachers. The teachers were tough enough to challenge us, and there wasn't a lot of that outside noise that the kids have to do now between internet, cell phones, single family, single parents, all sorts of economic strains. You mentioned that maybe we can talk about a Title I, what that means. So
yeah.
So,
and I do because Chicago once was recognized as the most segregated in the United States. There's in the city 77 communities. Most of them are separated by race, ethnicity, what have you. Maywood, with being part of Proviso Township and all. You have North Maywood and South Maywood and that kind of thing. So, I understand that. I just did not have that experience where we didn't have any racial fights or anything like that. I mean, our wrestling team, we had whites, we had Hispanics, we had, of course, blacks. Our state championship team, it was 11 blacks in the lineup, one white, Ed Rossalili, Ed Rossalili, our 85-pounder. But we loved him, treat him like a brother. So when I see this kind of stuff, and not much change since our days at Proviso East, I mean, the dynamics have changed. There's more Hispanics or whatever, but by and large, I just struggle with that opinion. So,
well, again, I think they were talking in general. If they crunched any data, they could probably see demographics. I mean, schools have to post that stuff, so there's possibilities there. I never knew. And people told me who went to District 89 that they knew there were better schools for smarter kids that he was to be sent to, and then their schools appropriate. So that ranking system, which was very popular in those days, wasn't really a good one, but that's what happened.
Yeah.
If we have time, I got a good Fred Hampton story about Fred Hampton Pool.
Go ahead. You got a moment. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so Fred Hampton, and this goes back to even some of the stuff that's been out in the last couple of years about the Black Panthers. Got a community effort to get the pool back together when there's no pool wasn't offered. And in one of the books, they talk about that there's so much racism that in different areas in the South, they'd have public pools that'd be brand new. But as soon as Black people started to come, they would close them. So it was crazy. So in order to open a pool, you have to have lifeguards, right?
Right.
So license, that's the state. So what would usually be the Forest Park was one of the communities that had this. They would just get Proviso East swim team members because they were authorized, they're swimmers and stuff. So they had a scenario where all the lifeguards at the Fred Hampton Pool were white, and there was a ruckus, rocks throwing, swear words. They had to close the pool because they couldn't keep the lifeguards safe. Just a matter of skin color. It had nothing to do with them coming in and being, overly tough on black kids or anything like that, as far as I know. But I mean, that's that's what segregation does. It makes you fear the other party, no matter if you know them or not. So it kind of it's not a good thing. And from this day forward, well, Proviso East doesn't have a swim team anymore or a gymnastics teams, but Proviso West does. And it's interesting with PMSA because you can elect to go to either school, and we've got some really good, successful athletes coming from PMSA to carry on our tradition of fine athletics.
Yeah.
Now we just need the tradition of fine academics, not in so much accomplishments or achievement, but in growth. Come to Proviso, you can learn a lot of different things, and you can really move forward if you make it through and attend. And that's the value that we think you have to have.
Yeah. So even extended from your book, in the podcast, I talked about how IB schools are now in Proviso East and Proviso West, which is a really, really big deal. And I understand, I believe that Proviso East and Proviso West are both Title I schools,
Yes.
Which in the midst of that, having an IB program is a very huge accomplishment, which is separate from Title I schools, by the way. But why don't you talk for just for a few moments about Title I schools? What is that about, and how do you come?
Well, as the things changed, a couple of interesting things. There's the first black superintendent at Proviso East, and I have in his book, I forget his name off the top of my head, decided, and it was recommended, and the board approved it, that Proviso East become a college prep high school. So they scrapped, pretty much the printing, which was going to go on its wayside anyway, and the mechanics, home economics, and they changed it. So the main impetus was just to get everybody a chance to go to college, which is the way everybody thought in those days. Later on, as things changed in Maywood, the economics, there's always been a housing shortage period after World War II, no matter where you go. It got to be where there was a decreased investment. Property taxes should be against the law to pay for education. We have it here in Illinois. Lots of other states don't have that. So what happened was that if you have a population of 30%, if your school population is under the poverty level stated by the federal government, you're entitled to federal funding. So it's kind of like affirmative action with dollars. However, they don't tell you how to get out of that, and they don't tell you what this strategy is. So every year, and I kind of tweak this as dubious, people will talk about large class sizes at Proviso East. The first month of October, they're gigantic. The end of October or September, end of October, they're down to nothing. There's like over 70% of kids don't even go to school. So they base their allocations on Title I to the school attendance. I don't know if there's ghost students or if it's an issue. I'm not so concerned with losing funds from the federal government because it's a stigma. Would you send your child to a poverty school? And it's a tough question because there's lots of elements. It's a matter of, again, it's one of those stigmas. And once that stigma is planted, you're kind of baked in. If you look at Google and you Google in Fenwick High School and you Google Proviso High School or Proviso East High School, Google gives you two different bios of it. And the Fenwick High School say college preparatory. Most of their kids go to college. Then it comes to Proviso. They talk about had been in the bottom of the list in Illinois. That's institutional discrimination. They're using facts and figures that probably aren't even current. And that gives a bad effect of anybody looking. So if you move from out of state, come to the area, you look at the Google, well, I'm not even looking at Proviso. I'll just go to Fenwick or Ignatius or LTE or OPRF, whatever. Right. So Title I is really important. I think nowadays, the way I feel in urban planning in Maywood, particularly, and Bellwood, those are communities on the go. They're changing investment. They're doing different things with housing. Forest Park's taking their time. They haven't really got it yet. But in those communities, there's making changes, and I think that's going to be a key impact. Now, if they can connect that with the idea that Proviso East, Proviso West, PMSA are job creators, students who go there and get jobs, then you got it made in the shade. But until that time, it's going to be a struggle because people don't use the services there because they're afraid. So.
Title I's open the door. It opens the door for opportunities in careers to bring in programs that are unique in nature, like financial literacy and things like that help students prepare for their future. It's a federally funded program, as you mentioned, and it is an asset, not a liability. So parents need to recognize that Title I doesn't mean bad. Title I means opportunity, right?
And it doesn't mean forever, too. I mean, you need those assistants because obviously the local didn't do their job. They didn't do their support. That social capital that was there before was gone. Federal government comes in with that, and that's the thing we have in this day and age. Federal government has to step in on civil rights because they weren't doing it right. They had to, there was a lynching in Maywood in 1904 or 1908. Linnell Grace, the late Linnell Grace, told me that story. And he was happy that they tore down the building because there was a lynching in Maywood in the 20th century. It's very unraveling to learn that we didn't have a peaceful transition when integration or different races came in, and whether it's Irish or Italian or Mexican discrimination or Asian discrimination, definitely there was a race issue, and Black people suffered under that yoke for a number of years, and it took its toll at Proviso East and Proviso West.
How can we purchase your book, Bob Careers Proviso? How can
well, easy enough. I sell more e-copies than the paperbacks. There's some local distribution, but the easiest way is you can go to Amazon Books, or you can go to Barnes & Noble Books, and you can purchase, I think it's $11.99, something like that. Ebooks $3.99. I like to encourage people. I am going to restart my COVID stopped on the book tour, and Chicago Public Library will probably be my next headed source. I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you, and this will be a valuable tool for me, just for the fact that there's more people who look at it, they can agree with it or disagree with it, but the fact is they're thinking about it. And people who are in the school now can look at it and say, listen, this guy made it, how come we can't? I mean, it should be a testimony to just getting our act together. Adults have to behave like adults at the Proviso, and that'll be hard if we don't talk about board and politics and stuff. But on occasion, it's a distraction to the classroom environment and doing education the way it should be done, which is keeping kids engaged, keeping them safe, getting them growth, letting them make decisions, and letting them learn how to learn and teach at the same time. So,
I want to ask you, as we start to wind down this podcast, Bob, really quick, what is your engagement with the current school board, as a former board member? Really quick, what do you see taking place, and is it an opportunity for
they're having a struggle with governance? Board after training, first of all, every candidate that runs for school board should be congratulated. It's a thankless job, and you spend money, and it takes a lot of time. I spent 4 years, away from my family. I was about a 20-hour-a-week board member, and then I went to college at the same time, so I had my hands full. But point being is that once you become a board member, there's a role that you play, and unfortunately, in Proviso, micromanagement is one of the throats that they like to keep off on. And to me, there's all sorts of process. Now, why you're a professional in a bunch of different ways, why would a layperson want to say that as a professional, you don't do your job correctly? So attacking administrators for the fact that they're incompetent or stupid or whatever, to me, has some racial guidelines, but it also has that distrust factor.
Okay.
The other thing is that board members are not expert educators. All they are board members for policy. They do their goals. The goals are given to the superintendent. The superintendent is the executor. If he or she can't do it, they get a new superintendent. It's not the best process in the world, but that's the one we have to have. There's a lot of kids. How many employees does an average company have? And figure how many teachers Proviso Township has. That's a pretty good broad group. Okay. So I would encourage people to stay involved, but at the same time, don't get distracted on political infighting, personal infighting. Look on the educational thing. Boast about what the school is potentially, and help kids in school now, not for the future, and don't look in the past.
Very good. Wise words from a former school board member, and appreciate the words of wisdom. Yes, absolutely. And so as we close this podcast, I'd like to thank you again, Bob Cox, for taking time to speak with me about some very sensitive matters from your time growing up as a Proviso East student, post Proviso East, and the things that you're doing currently. And thank you very much. I'll give you the final word to offer any words of wisdom or words of suggestion for the Proviso Township community. And the stage is yours.
My suggestion is, folks, look at Proviso East in its potential form. Look at it. Don't automatically default it as not the place to send your child. Public education needs your support. We pay for it. It's certainly something we can all work together on. It's not that difficult. We have management of students, parents, community groups. So let's take that path instead of fighting and deciding it's not worth it. So many people have just said, I'm not going to go to this district. It's just not worth it. I'll move somewhere else. Consider that. It's 21st century. You can't stay in our blinders too much longer. Thanks.
Bob Cox, thank you again for joining us on this podcast. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I am Dr. Reggie Ratliff. Tune in for our next podcast, Let's Talk Maywood, for our next exciting guests. Until then, be safe, continue to support your community and your school board. God bless you, and good night.